We're learning as a schus for Shleima Filan Chai Baserach. We're on Ayin Dalid Amid Beis, 7 lines from the bottom, six lines from the 7 lines from the bottom. Dorish Rava, Nava, Nava Araschai. Nava, Rashi says, is a gas, is a hagas, a wine press. He says an alternative way to clean it, to get out the yayin nesech from it. We had all the different, we have all the whole Amid discussing under what circumstances you need to be makalef, you need to remove the pitch in order to take out the yayin nesech. We said if it was darach, if it was trampled on, it needs kiluf, it's not enough. Or maybe it's even kiluf is not enough. But now we're giving another option is our sochai, our tochai, means you resicha is to boil it. So basically you boil it. And that will also remove the yayin nesech from it. I assume this is from the din of Hagala that we're going to address on the next Amid, that, when you're taking out non-kosher food from when you buy when you send in the mashgichim, to kasher a hotel kitchen, or when you buy a new house and you start kashering. So I'm assuming this is a variation of that. The same way you could remove taste of non-kosher food from something, you could also take out from the wine press, where it was embedded through one of the methods that we discussed earlier on the Rava ki have a meshader gulfi laharpanya. When Rava would send his bottles to Harpanya, he would send them with goyim, and there's a chashash that they would put their yayin into the bottles, and it would absorb over time that yayin nesech. So utsachavlu apumayu, he would turn them upside down and put them into a bag, v'chasamlu abritzayu, and then he would make a chasima, seal the bag that it was in. So you'd have the Mefarshim explained that he had a double simon. He had, first of all, that it was upside down in the bag, and secondly, the bag was sealed. So he had the double simon, so the guy couldn't get into it. And even though it was a long time, they still, a double seal is sufficient. Kasavar, why was it necessary? Kasavar, kol davar shemachnisa lekim afilu fisha gazu beirabanan. Even if they weren't going to hold on to it for such a long time, but since it was it's a type of thing. A bottle is something that you store wine in it. So even if you just sent them for an hour, which wasn't really enough time for it to fully absorb, the Chacham's takana, that you have to be chayshish, that it would fully absorb and be unable to be removed, they're chayshish even for a small time. We don't want you to leave it such a type of thing with them for any amount of time, because then you might come to leave with them for a longer period of time and not realize that it then absorbs and it needs a full scale removal, nigov or kilov or resicha. Now we're going to pivot to how we remove we discussed that what nigov is, right? We said one of the Mishnah said under some circumstances, the Mishnah said, Gas shel Evan, a stoneware kli, a stoneware wine press that has pitch on it, you menagav it, you dry it out. Now we're going to say exactly what that nigov is. The menagvan, how do you dry out? What is that procedure for taking the yayin nesech out of the pitch covered wine press? Rav Amar b'mayim, Rav Bachana Amar be'efer. Rav says you use water to get it out, and Rav Bachana says you use ash. Rav Amar b'mayim v'loy be'efer. Rav Bachana Amar be'efer v'loy mayim. L'chayr, you need each one of those things. Just using ash will leave you a very dirty wine press. It won't clean it. And just using water that's the same thing as rinsing it. So it seems clear you have to use some combination of the two things. Ella, Rav of a mayim who adin le'efer. Rabbi Bachana Amar le'efer who adin le'mayim. When they're saying what you use, they're discussing what you use first. So Ravu says you use mayim, first you use water, and then afterwards afer. And Rabbi Chana says afer, and then afterwards mayim. Now, two things you have to realize about this. First of all, this is not the complete story. As we're going to see in the Gemara, it's a machlekes. Even after this, you have to do further iterations of the water and the afer. And secondly, the Gemara is going to say the loy pligin. This is not a machlekes. This is that one says mayim and then afer, and the other one says afer mayim. It depends on the circumstance. Ha b'retivasa, ha b'yabashta. If it's ha b'retivasa, if it's wet, if it's for example, a gas shel evan that has zephes on it that we said needs negiva. If it's still wet, it still has the yayin nesach on it. So the first stage is you have to put the ash to soak up the yayin nesach. Then you take the water to rinse that off. But if it's yavashta, if it's dry, so first you have to put in water to liquefy. It means the yayin nesach dried up, and there's dried elements of it. So if you just put on water, if you just put on ash, it will just mix with it. It won't do anything. First, you have to like sort of revivify the dried up yayin nesach. Then you put the ash, and then, as we're going to see later on, then you have to put on another iteration of water to eventually rinse it off. But they're not being chaylik. They're just talking about which one goes first. Depends what the situation. If it's dry, then you add water first. If it's moist, then you put on ash first to soak up the wet yayin nesach. Itmar. Rav Mishmei de Rav Amri, in the house of Rav, they said b'shem Rav, Tarti Tlas. They said you need 2 or 3 ways from the mayim and the afer. You need to do 2 and 3 of them. So Rashi says Tarti Tlas, but bertivasa, where it's wet, Tarti afer umayim b'yavashta. Efer umayim, by Yavashta tlas umayim ve'efer umayim. By the Yavashta you need mayim, efer, and mayim. So according to the first shot, you need only 2 things. If it's dry, and if it's wet, then you have to first put on the efer, I'm sorry, to absorb the yayin nesach, and then you go through the regular water and afer. Ushmul Amar Tlas Dalad.
So when it's dry, according to Rav, it's even you need more.
According to who?
To Rav.
Rav, we said 2 or 3.
Right. I'm saying when it's dry, it needs more steps than when it's wet.
No, the other way around. He said Tlas. Rashi said the Tarti Tlas. I'm sorry. Tarti Tlas, Bertivasa Tarti. If it's wet, you need 2. Efer umayim b'yavasha Tlas.
Right.
So the dry needs more.
The dry needs more. I would think. I thought if it's moist, it's stronger, but I guess not.
I think yeah. You think that the moist, because first you need the afer. I'm sorry, I keep saying that, to absorb it, and then you go into the cleaning. But Shmuel Amar Tlas Dalad. He says 3 and 4. So Rashi Tlas Bertivasa. You need 3 when it's wet. Efer umayim ve'efer. V'av pi shechoyzem v'noisen mayim lahavera efer. Even though you can never end with efer, because you can always have to rinse that off. Hanu mayim like a choshev. That is not counted lav l'shem negiva. That's not part of really removing the yayin nesach. That's just to clean off the wine press. El kaisem in efer. V'dal b'yabashna mayim. First you put water to get it wet. Efer umayim ve'efer. Umayim basroi lechashiv. So according to, it's really 4 and 5, not 3 and 4. Rav le boy efer elchodezim. No Shmuel boy efer trezim. Bein b'tivasa bein b'yavash. So the chilik between Rav and Shmuel is Rav holds you need one time afer, you need ashed one time, and Shmuel holds you need it twice. Besura Masni Hachi. That's what they did in Surah. They had this machlokes Rav and Shmuel of whether it's 2-3 or 3-4. But when Bedisa Masni Be Rav Amri Mishmei Rav Tlas Dalad. In Surah they have it. I'm sorry, in Pumbedisa they have it that Rav said 3-4. So and Shmuel Amad Dalad Vehei V'loy Pligi. But it's not really a machlokes between Surah and Pumbedisa. It's just a question of how they describe it. In Surah, they say the machlokes 2-3 and 3-4 because they're not counting the last water, and in Pumbedisa that they counted the last water, which was not directly part of the cleaning process, that they counted it as 4-5. Bo minem rebavo hani gurgoi the aramoi. These they were like nets that they used to hold together the grapes while they were crushing them to remove the wine. So it was an implement used, part of the tools of the trade of making wine. Mai, what's the process for being menagav that? Amle bavo tnisua. We learned in Brisa, Hareyu shahayu gasav ubeis badav tmeim. This is not talking anymore about yayin nesach. This is, where is this? Nida. It's Brisa bro Nida, and I think it's also in Tyrus. So someone who's his gas, which is his wine press, ubeis badav, which is his olive oil press, tmeim. They got tame, and he wants to use it with kachim. He wants to use it with truma, so he has to be metar them. Ubikish lasoisam betayra hadafin. So Rashi explains dafim are like these boards that they would use to crush the grapes or the olives. V'ho adoshim. It's from the lashon dosh, to thresh. So that, what did Rashi say, is adoshim hainu gas atzma shekarin might. That's the actual press, the wine press or the olive press. Lulavim are palms, palm fronds. What we use as a lulav, but when they open up, they would use them as brooms to put together the grapes and the olives. Madichan, you just wash them off. So Rashi says, Madichan, is it Rashi? Remember, it's a big chiddush, this Rashi. Madichan, 4 lines down in the wide lines. B'mayim. Val Mishnah zu yesh lishmech. You could be samech on this Mishnah. She'ein tzarech efer legas. That you don't need the niguv that we've just gone through at great length to describe, and our Mishnah said you need niguv. Mitpashim ne'ravov v'lei amin zu ein Mishnah. The tani ba the sagi legas b'hadacha. I said tani the boy niguv. Shma mina kamu barabon basrei pasti hilchasakavase. From the fact that Ravo quotes this brisa and he doesn't ask from our Mishnah, Brisa is that this brisa replaced the halacha that was brought in the Mishnah, and you don't need nigov, you don't need to dry with the afer and the water. It's sufficient just to rinse it off. When you're talking about an actual, the actual pitch-covered gas, a pitch-covered wine press. But in any case, that's not really what we're bringing this for. We're trying to determine what the rule is with these nets that they use to hold the grapes in place. So now we're up to Vahakulin, which is the similar type of thing. These the gurgi that we're talking about, these nets that they use to hold together the grapes. Shel netzarim v'shel bitzbutz. If they're made out of netzarim, which is reeds, and bitzbutz, different pshatim, either butz, which is flax, or Rashi says canvas. Use the word canvas. If you look up where it says Rashi says bitzbutz, you use the word canvas. Menagvan, those need nigov. They absorb more than the wine press itself. They're more absorbent, so therefore they need nigov. V'shel shiva v'shel gemi. If it's Shifa and Gemi, which are different types of even more absorbent reeds that they use to hold together the grapes, Miyashnan Yud Beis Chodesh. You have to wait. You have the last resort is you dry them out for 12 months, and then you can clean them off and use them. Rishon Gamliel says you have to wait from 1 year when you use the gas till the next year's harvest to be able to use it. We just said 12 months, and now you're saying from 1 year to the next year, it's the same thing. The Gemara answers no, it's a difference where the harvest is delayed more than 12 months. According to the Tanakama, it's 12 months a hard out after 12 months, whether you got to the next harvest or not. So if it's churfi, if it's a little bit shorter or a little bit longer, then you'll have to according to Tanakama, it doesn't make a difference. According to the second Mandamer, it depends on the length of the Chacham Misakin until the next time that you do a harvest. Rabbi Yossi Aimer, back to the Brisa, he says a different pshat. Miyad, someone who doesn't want to wait 12 months, and like we said, you can't do nigov. Nigov is not sufficient because they're too absorbent. Magilam beroischen. You could either boil them, you do hagala with hot water, or you pour over them. I guess this is meizesim is it has a little oil in it, so it could boil it out a little bit faster. Doesn't have to be as hot. You could put it under a spout that has it's like a pressure washer, spout that has water coming out of it fast, or in a spring that has very fast moving waters. The kama, I know. How long do you have to do it for? You have to do it for I know. We're going to describe in a second how long that is. So you leave it for a long time under running water. That also works. The Brisa says, just like we say by Yain Nesach, we also say by Tyrus. So Gemara Klap Elaya. It's exactly the opposite. We're bringing the din of Tumah because we didn't know what the halacha was. How do you remove the Yain Nesach? So what are you saying? You have the same din by Tumah as you have by Yain Nesach? But Tyrus Kaiminan. We're talking about Tyrus here. This Bryce is talking about Tyrus. The Bryce is saying exactly the opposite. We're telling you the din of Tyrus, and the same will apply by Yain Esach. But in any case, this last din of Rabbi Yossi, that he said you leave it under running water for Oina, Kama Oina, Rav Chiya bar Abba, Rabbi Yechon, Oyoim Oylaila. Either a day, meaning the daylight hours, or a night. Rav Chana, Sheina, Rav Chana Sheina says, "V'amila Rav Chana bar Sheina." Some people say Rav Chana the son of Sheina. Amar Rav Bachani says b'shem Rav Chana. Amar Rabbi Yechanan Chatzi Yom v'Chatzi Laila. It means half of the daylight hours and half of the nighttime hours. Amar Shua Yitzchak v'Loi Pligi. It's not a machlekes. Ha b'Tkufas Nisan v'Tishrei. That which we said either a day or a night, that's in the spring or the fall. Meaning at the time that we're getting to that point right now when the day ends at about 6 and it starts at 6. So then it could be either the day or the night. Either one is 12 hours. But in the middle of the summer or middle of the winter, by summer you have a much longer day and a much shorter night, or by vice versa during the winter. So then you have to do half a day and half a night, but you still result, if you do half of a day and half a night, you're always going to result with 12 hours. Because each one is going to be double, as the day gets longer, the night gets shorter. But the point is, you always end up with essentially 12 hours. That's the amount of time that the tires the kalim have to be under the running water to remove the tumah. Amar Yehuda, Hani Ravki da Aramoy, the Mazia, these are like bags that they would put after they smushed the grapes. They had the leftover sediment or the sediment that settled on the bottom of the wine. They would take it out, they would put it into a bag, and twist the bag to squeeze out the last little bit of wine. Maidichan. Those, so the mazif, it's made out of hair, a hair of a person's hair. Person's hair is very not absorbent, so all you have to do is rinse it off, and the wine, whatever yayin nesach is on it, will be removed. The amra, if it's made of wool, menagba, then you have to do negiva with the afer and the mayim. The kisna flax is very absorbent, miyashan. Then you have to wait 12 months. The ikka katri sharilu, and if there are any knots in it, then you have to untie the knots, because the knots will make it just like a woman when she goes to the mikveh has to untie her knots because it will retain liquid in it. So too, even though, there's different Rishonim about which of these three things that we're talking about. We're talking about human hair, we're talking about wool, or we're talking about the last thing of just flax. But the idea is that you have to untie it to make sure that all the liquid gets out. Hani dekuli v'chalasa. These are different types of strainers. So a strainer made out of like a basket, and chalasa, Rashi says, is a kaveris, which is a beehive. So you have a strainer that's shaped like a beehive. The aramoi that belong to non-Jews, so you have to be choishish for yayin nesach. The chiti bechavli the tzuri, if these strainers are tied together with ropes that are made from tsuri, which is dekel, which is from a palm. Medichan, you can just rinse them out. Those are not absorbent. The tzafsa, which Rashi says min gemi, which is something a little more absorbent, lenagvan, you have to do negiva. The kisna, and again, a flax, which we said just before when we were talking about the bags, miyashin, you have to wait a year. V'isbu kitri sharilu, and again, if there's knots, you have to untie them. Itmar. Amar sha'ich yadi legas, b'noga mashkolas. And Amaretz, who is choshed that he's tamei, and he stuck his hand into the wine press, and he touched a bundle of grapes. Rebbe Chia Chad Amar Eshkel v'Chosu v'Oisav Tamein. One says that the bundle of grapes that he touched, and anything that it touches are all tamei, because the original one he touched is a rishon, becomes a rishon. He's a avatuma, and he makes what he touches into a rishon, and then the rishon makes this sheni also tamei. But the rest of it, a sheni doesn't have the kayach to mitam the rest of it. The other one says the whole wine press is tamei, as I think what the Gemara is going to be saying later on, is that since it's all sitting in the liquid, it's mixed together with the liquid immediately spreads the tumah throughout the entire wine press. Lamanda Amar Eshka v'Chaysav Tmeim v'Chalagas Kula Tahira. Maishna Mehadetnan. How is that different from what we learned in the Mishnah? Why is not the whole thing tamei? Sheretz and Imsaberechayim. You find a sheretz, which is obviously a metama, and you found it in a mill that was used to make olives. It only is metama what the sheretz is touching. And if there was liquid going around, then everything is tamei. Everything that it touches is tamei. So what we see that because there's oil, that the gas, or the rechaim in this case, had olives in it that were all in the same oil. When you touch one olive, when the sheretz touches any olive, it also is metame everything else. It's also connected through the oil. So why is it any different by the grapes? Why don't we say that the grapes are also connected by the yayin, and it makes everything tamei, or makes everything makes everything tamei. So Gemara hasam le'mafik le'midi hacha mifsiki eskoilos. Well, it says it's not the same. Olives are all individual things. So every olive in the oil is looked at as part of the same group. But Ishkalis, grapes come in bunches. They have, a cluster of grapes. So each cluster is, even in spite of the fact that it's in the wine, it still has its own identity, and the tumah does not travel from one to the other. They're not looked on as one group. When you have olives, you have one big olive oil with olives. But when you have a bundles of grapes, each grape has its own identity. So only what's being directly touched by the bundle that was touched by the Amaretz becomes tummy. The Rabbanon paskin to Rav Yirmiyah, and some people say to the son of Rav Yirmiyah, Kedivrei Aimer Eshel Chayzav Tmei V'Chol Hagas Kula Tahira. We paskin in the end like the Mandamar that says the rest of the wine press is going to be tar. Zok the Mishnah. Halakeach Kli Tashmish Mina Ovid Kechavim. Someone who buys. Now we're going to go like I mentioned before we started. Now we're going to be talking about the din of Hagala, of Stamazai, of Kasher and Kalim, which we learn from Midian, from the Melchama with Midian, where the Torah says, Zoitzchukas HaTorah Shemes Moshe, Achaz Azav as a Kesef as a Choshes as a Barzav as a Bdil as a Feres, Chol Davar Sheyavai Ba'esh, anything that you captured from Minyanim that was used in fire, Taviru Ba'esh, you have to put it in fire in order to get rid of, to be malavin it from whatever non-kosher taste is in the kelim. Betir, betoher, and then it will be toher. We're going to explain what the betoher is teaching you. Ach, b'mei nida yischata, you should wash it in mei nida. And whatever was didn't go in eish, it should go into water. So that tells you the din that you need the Torah says when something had tarfus go into it through eish, you have to do libun, you have to pass it through fire in order to remove it. And the same will apply if it was used for cooking with water, with a liquid. You just have to, then you don't need libun, you don't need to do it in fire, you just do it with libun. And if it wasn't done with either of those things, there's no heat, then you just rinse it off. So let's see the Mishnah. Someone buys a kli, a utensil from Ovid Kechavim, that which needs tefillah, which was used with tefillah, it wasn't used for cooking. So, or that the way to be mitarit is by tefillah. So that's what you do. You also toivel it in a mikvah. So Rashi understands this to be saying it's talking about the din of tefillas kelim, something that a guy owned always needs tefillas kelim, and you have to be toivel it, separate from the din of hagala that we were talking about, or removing it. So the Mishnah is saying lahagil yagil, that which absorbed food from liquids, then it also has to be purged of the taste of the non-kosher food by hagala, by using liquid. L'lavin bar, y'lavin bar, and that which was used over the fire, you have to burn out the non-kosher. Hashvud v'haskoila, the shvud is a spit that you stick the animal through the animal and you roast it over fire. V'haskala is a grate that you cook on. L'lavin bar, those things are used directly over fire, so you have to burn out with the fire. Hasakin, a knife, shafa, you have to basically grind out whatever the surface of the blade to remove through the pressure of the blade it absorbs, so you have to grind away the top layer, v'tayr, and then it's tar. Zakimar. Tana, v'kulon tzrichen tefillah ba'arboim sa. All of them, this is immediately addressing what Rafal had asked, all of them need tefillah, this is not, again, before we get into the halachas of how you remove the non-kosher, whenever you, as we're going to see in this Gemara, whenever you buy something from a guy, you need to do tefillah, it needs tefillah's kelim. Minani mili, where does this come from? Amarava, Rava says the Amakra kol davar sheyavoi be'esh taviru be'esh v'tar. The Torah says anything that was in Eish, you have to pass through Eish, and then it says v'tar, and it will be tar. There's an additional layer of Tyra after you remove the non-kosher. In addition, you have to do tfilas kalim before you could use it. Tani Bar Kapara says a second pasuk. It says the Torah also says b'mei it has to be immersed in meinida. I might think since it says meinida, which is the waters of purification, but when a man becomes tummy tumas mace, he needs it's not just enough to have the meichatas, the para aduma spritzed on it. It has to be done on the third and the seventh day. You don't just do it once. So maybe when it says b'meinida, you need the same thing. Whenever you're taival a keli, after you purchase it from a guy, you need also on the third and the seventh day. Talmud Leimer, ach. The Torah says ach, chalak, to say that even though it says meinida, it's not the full taira of an like you would do for a person who became tamei, a tumas mace. When you purchase a keli, it only needs one immersion in a mikveh. Imke matam lema b'meidida. If that's the case, why is it b'meidida? Maim should not need a taival ban. Havriyamer arboim sa. So it's telling you that you need a mayim of arboim sa, that it has to be the same mikvah that nida is taival in. So we had two pshatim. First we said from Vatir, then we said from B'meidida. What do you need both of these limudim for? Itzach l'michta Vatir, Itzach l'michta B'meidida. Ikas Vatir, Havamina Vatir, Koldu. If it would just say Vatir, I would say, it would be any. We don't know that it means Arboim Sa. I'm sorry. Yeah. I don't know. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know it needs I'm sorry. You do it in any amount of water. That's the same water that a nida is taivan, which is a full size mikvah. Because of Rahman b'meidida, havamina harav shemesh kanida. Maybe you need not just being taival, but as we know, an isha who's a nida has to also wait for the end of the day before she could be taival. So that's why because of Rahman avatir la'alter, that you can, when you buy a kli from a guy, or you could take it to the mikveh immediately. You don't have to wait for the night to be taival. It's mashma even if it's a brand new kli, not necessarily a kli that was once, right? The Torah, even though the Torah describes where you had a non-kosher kli and you kashered it, and then you also need tfilas kalim. He says it's not necessarily the case. Even if it's a brand new kli that you bought from a guy, you also need tfilas kalim. Once you burn out the non-kosher, it has the same status as something that's brand new. Even so, it needs tefillah. Since we're learning from the pasuk, where do we see bedafka that has to be something that's used in eating? Right? We all know that the din of tefillah can only apply something that is used with food. How do we know it includes only those things that are used with food? Amalei kli suda amurim beparsha. He says, since we're talking about things that are used with eish and are used with water, so that tells you that we're talking about things that are used with the suda, because that's normally what's used with the suda. The way things are used typically with heat is something a meichel, something that's used with your food. It's also only when you bought it from a guy. Just like by what's the Maisa Shahaya? What does Rashi say? These were not bought, right? These were captured. I don't know. I just didn't think about it. I just assumed I took it that it has to be Kamaisa Shahaya. Um, I I guess it means that it was a Kamaisa Shahaya that they did a Kinyan when they took it from the Minyanim, they were Kainet. Aval Sha'ulin, but if it was borrowed where you don't own it, it has to be like the Minyanim, where they got a full complete Kinyan on it. When someone captures something in war, it belongs to them. But Sha'ulin, loy. Yisrael Yosef Zavin Mana de Marda Me'avid Gechavim. He bought a kli that was made out of dung and earth. So it was like a. So we're going to talk now about which things you all when you go to the mikveh for tefillas kelim, we're sitting. What's the din of the glass? What's the din of metal? And so this is where we get the din from. So if it's made out of dung and earth, Sava Latvili he thought he had to travel it. Amlehu me'Rabbanan, Rav Yaakov Shmei l'dim mefashim ne'eder Rav Yochanan kli matchas amurim b'parsha. The Torah talked about a metal kli, and that's what you have a chiyuv to be toivel, but not something made out of earth, and not something made out of dung. Amar Rav Ashi.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Avos Sha'ol in law, if you borrow it, you don't have to toivel it?
Yeah, if you borrow from a guy, there's no din tefillah. It's only if you bought it, only if you own it.
So you can use it and there's no problem?
Yeah.
Brand new, you borrow from a guy?
If you go to a restaurant, if you get first class service on the plane, even though the kalim there are made out of matches, you have no chiyuv to be toivel it before you use it, right? You can, as long as it's not a problem of kashrus. Right? If you get a cold thing on a metal kli, there's no need to be toivel. Yeah, and we're going to see some specifics about this. Sorry, I just I got this gift from my daughter, which is a little mug warmer to keep my coffee warm, but I didn't realize is that it like lifted my mug a little bit more, and then I spilled it when I went to pick it up. In any case, yeah. So we're gonna get back to this din of that it's only if it's something that's bought. Now we're talking about what material it's made out of. Ravashi, hani, yeah. Ravashi, hani kli schuchas. If you have a glass kli, hayel v'chinishdabru yeshlan takanat. Since glass, he says, can be fixed. We don't fix glass, but I guess they would melt glass and reconstitute it. Kikli matchas dami. It's included in the classification of metal, and it also requires tefillah. Kunya. What is kunya again? Plumiri, shel charas b'chufya shel aver. It's earthenware that's covered over with lead. So earthenware kli does not need tefillah, but lead, which is a metal, does. One says originally it's earthenware, so it doesn't need tefillah. But since you covered it with lead, it does need tefillah. And the halacha is that it does need tefillah, depends on what it's covered with. This is back to the question of whether it's owned, whether the yid bought it. What if he has a mashkin from a guy? So a mashkin collateral, sometimes, a collateral is like that's the real owner. Because if let's say you're a pawn shop, right? And the guy comes to you with his silver candlesticks and he takes his money, chances are the guy's never going to come back to redeem his candlesticks. It's done with. It belongs to the pawn shop owner. So if it's not candlesticks, let's say it's a set of knives, and he wants to use them, he's going to have to be told that. Amar Mar Baravashi, Abba Mashkin le Ovid Kechavim Kasa de Kaspa. Ovid Kechavim gave him a silver cup. He was toivel. He felt he had to be toivel, even though it was just a mashkin, and he drank from it. I don't know if he holds that, a mashkin is always like a sale. Or is it because in this specific case, he knew that the guy was never going to pay it back. The guy indicated that he was giving it to him and he didn't want it back. He just put it in the form of a mashkin. He gave him the first right, but it was almost like he already foreclosed on him. So he doesn't know whether the general halacha is always that a collateral is as if it's sold. Yashir Kayach, Be'ez Hashem tomorrow, unfortunately, I